Sage Wanderer here. I wanted to take a moment in retrospect and look back on my time in Oregon and my experiences there and how they relate to what I feel like is inevitable, a civil war of sorts, at least an attempted communist revolution and a counter-revolution. This could lead to the secession of states and the breaking up of our union. And some people, such as myself, have advocated the peaceful separation and the relinquishment of territory and a division between the right and the left, especially in parts of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, like the Jefferson State movement. And I think there's a movement in Washington to separate East from West. While recently back in Oregon for a month to do some music work there, I was able to run downtown and cover the counter-protest, or the protest, I guess you could say, of the loggers and the truckers in Oregon who were protesting the carbon tax. And if you're familiar with the story, you know, the legislature, the Republican congressman had fled the scene to stop the leftists from passing this carbon tax, which would negatively affect the truckers and the loggers. And to support them, the congressman, the truckers and loggers came out in this huge protest where they encircled the Capitol in their log trucks and in their big rigs and in their tractors, and agricultural workers came across the mountains from eastern Oregon and they brought their giant tractors and their combines and their huge harvesters, and they brought them out and they encircled the Capitol. And the attitude was, we're not going to take this. We're not going to pay your carbon tax, and because we can't. It'd put us out of business. We can't. We can't pay 20 cents a gallon on gas. And so I think it showed the hidden side of Oregon in that live stream that I did. You can look that up in my past live streams. There were 2 live streams while I was there from the Capitol. One was for the liberals protest, when they were, you know, protesting that the congressman should be arrested and dragged back in chains. At the reply, one congressman said, if you come after me, you should send bachelors and make them heavily armed, because I will not be a political prisoner of the state of Oregon. So that was the big statement that he may still face some charges over. Some saw it as a threat against the state police. So, but while I was there, you know, I think that live stream with all the truckers and all of the big rigs from the eastern side of the mountain, it showed the hidden half of Oregon. That everyone thinks that Oregonians are blue-haired vegans and leftists and, you know, Antifa members and, you know, incels and all. They have all these, and they're right. That describes a lot of people in Portland. Not everybody, but a lot of people in Portland. That Portland has a wealth of them kind of people, right? But on the eastern side, the high mountain plains, the eastern Oregon desert, places like John Day and places like Lakeview and Klamath Falls, and down south even in Medford, Grants Pass, you know, even along the coast in places where there's a lot of fishermen, you know, smaller regions along the coastline, are all very, very conservative. And even in the valley itself, even within a stone's throw of the capital of Salem, capital of Oregon, which is Salem, there in a small town known called Dallas, Oregon. That's actually really close to the Capitol, and that's where that congressman who threatened the state police came from. That he wasn't from Eastern Oregon, like I'd said in a previous video. When I dug deeper into this, I was confusing him with another guy who was speaking, who was from Eastern Oregon. But that guy, he was from Dallas, Oregon, which is really right close to the Capitol. So when you get outside of the Capitol and get to these agricultural areas around the cities, then you get a very different political scene or type of person. They tend to be more conservative, or at least they're moderate liberals, or they're moderate conservatives, and they tend to be centrists or even center-right. And, of course, that center is moving now, isn't it? yeah, things are getting wacky. So, you know, there's another side of Oregon, and that protest that I captured on the live stream while I was there really showed you those forgotten people, those non-Portlandians. And so there's a conflict brewing there. And the left is getting more and more radical. They've been convinced by AOC and some others, some big mouth, high level speakers on the left, on the progressive side, who are calling these detention centers concentration camps. I won't even get into splitting the hairs, but I will say this, that's violent and it's rhetoric. And you're saying, why is that violent rhetoric, Sage? Because of the next conclusion that another left online figure pointed out in a recent tweet, when he said that he was taught that concentration camps are meant to be liberated, that righteous people will liberate people from concentration camps. So, if ICE detention centers are concentration camps, then ipso facto, by default, it is your responsibility to free these people from their, toil in this concentration camp, and you must liberate this concentration camp. So, lo and behold, recently, an anarchist, a 67-year-old in Tacoma, tried to liberate the ICE detention center there, and he set some stuff on fire, but in the end, even though he was armed with a rifle, all he managed to do was get his own self iced by the local PD. Wasn't long ago, we had the Eugene incident, and there was fire bombs and right after an Antifa member was shot by police, they found fire bombs and incendiary devices planted all around the Eugene Springfield Police Department. So this has been brewing for some time, and the leftists are getting so radical that I think you're going to see more of these kind of Sinn Féin, kind of IRA, kind of Irish, Republican Army sort of terrorist sort of activities. The left is arming itself. In the last couple of years, I've worked to show that. And I'm going to summarize some of these videos, and you can go back in my library and find them for yourself. Many of them you'll find in the Civil War 2.0 folder, but I don't always get stuff in the right folders or in folders, but folders or playlists, But the Antifa was caught working with ISIS. I've seen photographs of Antifa flags flying side by side with ISIS flags in ISIS terrorist training centers. And they've been flying these people down to Central and South America, to communist-dominated places, like Venezuela, where they're getting training from bona fide military trainers. And they're equipping and arming themselves here under our own Second Amendment. And, hey, I can only hope that as the leftists and the Antifa arm themselves and they go out and enjoy the fun and the craft and the skill of shooting and self-defense, that maybe it'll somehow red pill them. I can only hope, right? It's hard to be anti-Second Amendment when you just came back from the range and you had the time of your life shooting fully automatic firearms, or you can get your hands on them, or, just doing scenario shooting or shooting steel plates or something, even shooting skeet. If you play with your guns, if you go out and use them in sport and in training, you stop wanting to steal everyone's guns. You stop wanting to disarm the people. But I don't know that that's going to work, because these people's political indoctrination is ingrained at them through the educational system. I really blame teachers. My sister, the one who's passed away, she taught so many children how to read, that she was an elementary school teacher, but she also at different times had taught junior high and high school and special ed. And she constantly struggled against even here in Texas and in Oklahoma where she taught, against the left-wing ideologies and ways of thinking. In fact, she would carry those home. She would get brainwashed at work and carry those home and fight with me, because I'm more conservative than any of this influence she was getting from the schools. That the schools have taken over and indoctrinated these people. And, so it's hard to break that kind of super heavy-duty level of training that people you know, once you've been through that kind of brainwashing at such an early age, it's hard to shake people loose from that. It's why I think armed conflict is inevitable in our country, because it's hard to reason with someone that's indoctrinated and brainwashed with socialism and communism. You know, there's a great show called old movie with John Candy and Tom Hanks. It's called Volunteers, and in it John Candy gets kidnapped by the Chinese communists, and they put him through re-education, and he comes out an automaton, you know, a robot, a communist propaganda machine, and all he can say is, you know, pro-communist, anti-capitalist things. And that's what all of these people remind me of when you go down there. And I have stood face to face with Antifa and looked them right in the eye and had conversations with them. You know, I mean, we've invaded each other's space and chest bumped. And I can tell you, these people are just like that John Candy character, man. They are immune to reason. They're completely immune to cognitive reasoning and logic. And to them, they've reinvented the language so much in their head that it's impossible. You know, it's easier for me to communicate with someone who barely speaks English than it is for me to communicate with someone who's brainwashed in this left-wing ideology. Because at least if I'm dealing with somebody that speaks another language, I can start to match up what my word means versus what their word means. But the language change between the right and the left, between the communist and the capitalist, the intentional manipulation and change of the language by the left is intended to confuse you. It's intended to cause division. It's intended to break down communication and prevent us from being able to logically communicate. Why do you think when you go to these rallies with a camera, they tell people, don't talk to them, don't talk to them? Because they don't want them to be exposed to your logic and your reasoning and your cognitive thinking, which is actually more natural and human than this brainwashed ideology of totalitarian group speak. You follow me? So because of these things happening in these hotbeds in the Pacific Northwest, because of these groups that are growing nationwide and connecting with international groups and internationalist terrorist groups, we're looking at least like this the sort of thing that went on in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s. And, you know, you could see terrorist activity click up. The big question is, when does the sleeping dog rise up? When do those loggers, you know, take the logging equipment off of their trucks and mount machine guns? When does that happen? When does the peaceful protest by the right turn into you better send bachelors and they better have them well armed, and then that happens and you start to have these skirmishes and you start to have these shootouts on homesteads? Already, we've got political prisoners being jailed. I told you 2 years ago that was one of the things that was going to be a Civil War indicator. I spoke on this topic in a video titled Paul Manafort's Arrest is a Civil War Indicator. Look that one up. Search for that. Paul Manafort's arrest was a Civil War indicator. I told you they'll start doing political arrests. Tommy Robinson was just sent to prison for contempt for simply being a journalist and reporting the truth in a public forum. Okay? First Amendment is their first target, and they've successfully taken it down. The Second Amendment is wounded, but it is not gone, and there's enough guns in this country to cause some chaos on both sides, right? So what we have here is a massive face-off. The spark and tinder's happening in some place like Oregon. So some out there might think me a coward for splitting Oregon. You know, the name Sage was tacked on to me. I did not choose it. I chose it for the channel. But people were referring to me by this name before, which simply just means wise. I think it's wise to leave these places unless you are a young combatant and you are ready to form a militia and go to work. If you're an old person, I hate to say it, I don't think I'm fit for service. I'm 51 and I got 2 bad knees. And I feel way better in Texas. That's an update. I need to get to my health update. I won't put that in this video, but Texas is good to me. I feel good here. So I came back to Texas to be surrounded by like-minded people. If there is going to be a center capital of the right-wing resistance to this communist tyranny, if all hell breaks loose and these states start to break apart into regions and groups, I want to be in the Lone Star State. And all my fellow Texans that cringe when they hear that, they're like, don't say it, Sage, they'll all come here. The kind of people, this is what I want a lot of you Texans to realize. A lot of the people that are coming here are the best of Oregon and Washington and California. It's because they're coming here because it's either come here or stay there and fight a war. And, you know, unless you're out of your mind, you don't really want war. Who wants war? I'll do just about anything to avoid a war, but I won't give up my guns, and I won't give up my dignity, and I won't give up my freedoms. But I'll give up Oregon. You know, it rains a lot there anyway. And Texas is dang pretty. I just got to say, I've always loved it here. And you won't find a better quality of people than Texans. I mean, just, hey, there's good and bad in any society, in any group. But the amount of good people outweigh the amount of bad people in Texas by far. And Texas is the kind of place you're more likely to have somebody pull over and help you when you broke down alongside the road than you are to have someone pull over and try to con you or hurt you when you broke down alongside the road. You're probably going to get 3 people trying to help you. And so I came back here to be protected. You know, nothing against my Oregon militia friends. I felt very safe there because, you know, they let it be known that they knew who I was and they'd figured it out. And so Antifa probably did too. And I know they did. I'm on the list. I mean, Evie used to come to my house, and she's one of them now. So they know who I am. And they're doxing all of us. They've been doing it for the last 2 or 3 years in America. If you've ever been to any one of these events, you're doxed. They know who you are. You're on Facebook, they got you, you know. But anyway, yeah, my Oregon militia friends made me feel safe, you know. Thanks, John, you know who you are. And others as well. But the fact of the matter is, in Texas, it's like everybody's the militia. Like, everyone out here thinks the same. If I show any of these Pacific Northwest Antifa rallies, show them Antifa spitting in people's faces, show Antifa pepper spraying women in the face and you know, slugging women and splitting people's heads open with crowbars, and these people in Texas, they want to go there. They want to go there and deal with it. They want to go there and bring the fight to them. So I'm surrounded by people who think like me. And in Oregon, I would have been hunted. Eventually, if you're a conservative, if you're a Trump supporter, if you're not signed on to the communist totalitarian state that's emerging in Oregon, if you hang around there, eventually they're going to come for you. And you'll have the choice of either going to the gulag, dying on the spot, or running and hiding like a rat. You know, if you fight back, you're probably going to die on the spot. You might take a few of them with you. But those are your choices, combat or refugee. So I came back to Texas because I think my calling might be from behind the lines. Maybe I can continue to broadcast to people. Maybe John does have a long mustache, and maybe the chair is against the wall. If you saw the same movie I did, you just got chill bumps. You know, maybe someone like me is needed, and if that's the case, I don't think I need to get killed on day 1 of this thing. And so I retreated to safer, peaceful pastures where an old guy like me should be. And I hope that we're not headed where we're headed, but if we are, there's no place I'd rather be than the Lone Star State. And know this, Texans, if you see an Oregon license plate, it's probably not a blue-haired vegan. They don't like it down here. I've known a lot of them in Oregon, and they have... I know some people that were trying to get to Florida, and they drove 1,000 miles out of their way so they wouldn't have to cross the state of Texas. Just like Thelma and Louise, you know. Was it Louise didn't want to go to Texas? So if you see an Oregon plate or a California plate or a Washington plate, chances are it's not some crazy libtard. Chances are it's a conservative gun owner who's tired of losing their rights, and they fled to the last free place in the world, which I believe is Texas. And I believe I live in the freest part of it. So I kind of am living proof, since I slapped down a shed barn out here, threw up a pole, and now I got a homestead. And I didn't have to ask nobody's permission. I just did it, right? So it's freedom, what's left of it. And we're in dire straits. Oregon is going to be at the epicenter of all of this. and Texas is the last refuge. So I kind of want to wrap this up by saying that if you live on the West Coast, I think you should take my lead, and that I feel like God removed me from that place for a purpose, and I think it's because things are about to get bad there. They're bad now, they're going to get worse. There's already tent cities of homeless people. So if you live there, make a plan to get someplace better. Montana, Wyoming, you know, a lot of places are better than there. You know, even go to the deep south, you know, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, lots of places there that are less liberal and less likely to break out in civil war. So this is the, I guess this is going to fall under the category of Civil War updates. And we'll just continue to talk about this as I watch it from a distance while still feeling very plugged in. I have people on the ground in Oregon. So I've got to say, God save our republic and hold us together. And if you can't, maybe peacefully separate. But Lord, help us not have the war unless we just have to. I mean, who wants a war? No one wants a war. War, what's it good for? Absolutely nothing. God save our republic.